Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes to allow people time to join and connect, and we'll be right with you. While we spend another minute or two waiting for everybody to connect, we have a couple of polls published in the polls section and would invite you to go and have a look. We'd love to find out where you're from, what you do, and what's most interesting for you on today's session. Once again, just waiting one more minute to allow people time to join, and would invite you to check out the polls in the polls section on the right side of the page to submit a little bit of information about yourself, whether or not you have a work from anywhere policy, where you're from, and what area of business you work in. Perfect. I think now is about as good a time as any to get started. Welcome to everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I think we can all agree that we're living in a bit of a crazy time. I'm sure that everybody on this call has probably had to deal with some difficult decisions this year, not to mention the last few since our lovely friend, the pandemic. The realities of politics and policies are setting in, but the truth is we're adapting. Some things go up, some things go down. The two things that are always constant are change and adaptation. New ways of working have really come to the forefront. People are shuffling between offices and home. Some companies are mandating RTO, but there are other things to look at and consider here, like the fact that productivity continues to rise. Business travel continues to rise as well. Many organizations that are mandating RTO or other policies similar are also looking into their benefits packages to make sure that they elevate their employer brand as a wonderful place to work, showing that they truly are part of the leading change for what's going on in the working industry. It's no secret to everybody that by the end of next year, millennials and Generation Z will account for at least 50% of the workforce. And with them and that change, lots of changes to expectations and ways of working and adaptations to sort of the new norm will really start to show their head and become accepted across industries as standard. One of the things that we find the most interesting here is in the world of working flexibility. These are a couple of statistics pulled from Flex's Flexible Working Report 23-24. And one of the core things that we focus on here at WorkFlex are working from anywhere schemes across the globe as a benefit for organizations. So it's definitely one of the most popular benefits from 2023. And we've got a really great statistic here from TUI, a very, very large international tourism organization. But there's been a 173% increase in colleagues requesting to go on a work-wide, which is their work from anywhere program in 22-23. There have been 24,393 days used in work-wide up to the end of 2023. The reality is that flexible working is here to stay. But the other side to that coin is that policies, politics, economics are going to continually shift, change, and we have to get used to how to adapt to those. So one of the big things that we're going to talk to you about today is travel compliance, how to manage that, how to accept and work with the changing expectations of talent, especially with work from anywhere schemes and business travel going around the world, and educate you on what to look for and how to become comfortable with that. I guess after that little monologue, it'd be good of us to introduce ourselves. So hello, I'm Brock Dale. Don't mind my accent. I'm not from Spain where I'm sitting today. I'm from Canada. I've been working in the travel industry for 15 some odd years, coming from airlines, travel management companies, and travel tech. And I currently lead the charge in business development for WorkFlex. Being here for a year and leading into business development in the UK and Ireland and other territories for our expansion. I'd like to introduce you to my colleague, Pieter. Mike, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Hello, everyone. My name is Pieter Manden, so don't mind my accent either. I'm Dutch, so sitting here in my home office in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I'm one of the co-founders of WorkFlex. My background is in tax law, so I'm a tax lawyer. Used to work at PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, for a pretty long time, almost 15 years. Here in the Netherlands, also in Germany, but also had a global role for the firm. And I always specialized in employer compliance when people temporarily work from abroad, so the global mobility department, more or less. Did a little bit of technology, but obviously within the big consultancies, that's a topic or difficult. And that's also one of the reasons that I started a couple of years ago now, WorkFlex, to basically build the global mobility compliance technology platform. But another very important reason for starting WorkFlex was that obviously the pandemic had totally changed global mobility. Usually, or back in the day, it was a department focusing on, let's say, maximum 2% of the population, basically the expats, maybe a little bit of business travel, but usually not. And then all of a sudden, due to the pandemic, potentially everybody could work from abroad a little bit, or they were simply just doing it without getting approval. And obviously the global mobility department was supposed or appointed or expected to solve the compliance issues or to make sure this could all take place compliantly, which was a very big adjustment for our clients. And I thought also technology could play a very important role in that, but also those new global mobility use cases, I thought could, let's say, deserve a company that's really focused on this. And that's basically what we do at WorkFlex. So we're building the work from anywhere compliance platform, or the global mobility compliance platform, if you will. We've started with work from anywhere compliance or vacation compliance and added business travel now well over a year ago. We also support clients with getting visas, and we're basically continuing to build the global mobility platform by adding these global mobility use cases to our platform. So we do not only build a platform and support clients, we also do quite a bit of research, and we've got a pretty exciting report to share with you. I'll also share some of the key findings from that report. Brock, would you like to introduce the report?
Yeah, fantastic. That's enough of a sales pitch for now, I think. People are here to learn about compliance and global mobility, so that's great. Of course, if anybody does want to learn more about what WorkFlex is doing, please feel free to reach out to us after the session. But Pieter and his team have been very hard at work via our Global Mobility Alliance on our cross-border working compliance and workforce compliance trends for 2024 and 2025. This very comprehensive and also very interesting report was released just earlier this week. You can find it via lots of different channels, LinkedIn especially. And it covers everything from the global mobility, the people operations, the talent expectations, and the compliance perspectives for everybody across the industry. Peter's got a couple of really interesting findings to take you through now. So I'll toss the mic back over to you, Pete.
Yeah, thanks. Just two notes. So we're here for you. Of course, we also very much enjoy just talking randomly and looking at ourselves in a tiny screen. But we're really here for you. And you may have questions around your work from anywhere policy, about what we've seen in the market, specific compliance questions, and you're highly invited to raise those questions. On the right-hand side, you can see a chat, but there's also a questions button, which is dedicated obviously for questions. So feel free to hit it and just post your question there. There were already some questions submitted prior to this session, so we'll definitely get to those at a later stage. But if anything comes up during the session, again, feel free to just raise the question. That's one. And number two is there's also a polls section on the right-hand side. Quite a few of you've already submitted their answers. We're really keen to find out like who you are, where you're sitting, but also if you already have a work from anywhere policy, yes or no. It's rather relevant, obviously, because of the title of this webinar, but also because of the results that we've got in the report, which you can download basically by clicking that left bottom button that you see popping up in your screen. I see that quite a few of you do not have a work from anywhere policy yet, but also a significant number does already have a policy, so that's pretty good. But there's still quite a couple of people that have not submitted their answer there. I see them coming in as we speak, so that's amazing. It works a little bit funny. I think you have to click submit vote for every single question. I took a little bit of time to figure that out myself. But yeah, I see the trend is our friend. So the majority does not have a policy yet, but a good number do already have a policy. So for work from anywhere now. So that's very interesting. Maybe very quickly before we dive into some of the key findings that we got from our survey, what are we talking about when working from anywhere? Of course, we can talk about home office just in the country of employment, but in general, work from anywhere is rather considered working from abroad, basically home office from abroad or a vacation home office from abroad for a limited number of days or weeks. And this is then usually initiated by the employee. So the employee wants to work from the south of Spain for a little bit because the winter in the Netherlands, the UK, or Germany is just rainy, cold, and or gray. So that's what we talk about when we're talking work from anywhere policy, basically. And if we go into the first slide with the results, Brock, that would be the next slide. I think it's pretty interesting because if I now look at the poll, we're at 61% that does not have a policy. From our report, from our survey, we actually got, again, also 60%, but 60% that does have a work from anywhere policy already. You can see it here on the screen. So the majority of employers that we have surveyed, mostly from Germany, the UK, and other European countries, they have already adopted this as a employee benefit usually. So it's kind of becoming the new norm. But of course, it's especially interesting that if we would have asked this question 3 years ago, that number would have probably rather been around maybe 6%. So it has grown super quickly to now over the majority of companies already offering this benefit. And that it is actually a benefit, you can see on the right-hand side. What is considered as, let's say, the advantages from having a policy like this? Well, it's obviously enhanced employee satisfaction, improved talent attraction. We see quite a few of the companies that we've surveyed or clients of WorkFlex advertising it really actively in their vacancies online. A positive impact on the company culture is another advantage. Increased productivity, always very difficult to measure, but at least it's a perceived increased productivity, and probably contrary to what quite a number of maybe rather senior managers within companies would expect. They kind of maybe think that as soon as people are not working in an office, productivity is very likely to decrease, let alone if that home office is not in the country of employment, but is actually somewhere where the weather and the food is nice. A cost saving on offices is also a partial benefit or an advantage of having a work from anywhere policy. And 4% do not really think that there's an effect. So that's like a very small minority, obviously.
For sure. And just given the fact that most of our guests today are UK HR professionals, a couple other statistics that I really like from the industry at large and from the Flexa report, not only that the next generation of workers, so millennials and Gen Z, some 63% expect a significant level of flexibility in their working provisions for their next job. And from the Flexa report, 48% of new job searches in 2023 included the work from anywhere scheme filter as a search. It was by far and above the most requested feature for a benefits package for somebody looking for their next place of employment. So it's really come to the fore and has just become accepted as standard now.
Very good. So I already see two questions which I think make sense to kind of discuss right now because it's quite fundamental, both of them. So I see Sarah's question. We allow work from anywhere, but we've not yet gotten a written policy. So a little bit worried about setting boundaries, yes or no. And Joanna, the question, what are the key considerations that need to be taken into account for compliance, but also in general to allow people the flexibility that a work from anywhere policy should allow them. Definitely compliance is obviously one of the considerations that you should take into account, and we'll get to that later. Especially fundamentally, do you want a policy for work from anywhere? Of course, nobody forces you to make a policy around this, but I think it has two key considerations that are, let's say, speaking for having a policy. The first one is, if you don't have a policy, it's probably still going to happen because you've also not forbidden it. So people will go, and they will go without any awareness, without any preparation, and that's especially for the compliance consequences that it can have a pretty serious issue. So it is compliance-wise definitely possible to have your people work from abroad for a little bit of time, but you do want to arrange things, and you can definitely set the boundaries for this in a policy. That is one. And the other one is, if you actively want to market it or actually want to grasp the benefit of it, people should obviously know, and you should communicate it. And what else is a better way of communicating it by saying, look, we've got a policy for this, and it says you can do this, this, and this. So those would be, let's say, the two remarks that I have on this. We've got tons of examples of work from anywhere policies. I'm also happy to share a template. You can also find them online. But if we go maybe 2 slides, Brock. Yes, this one. This relates already pretty strongly to what should be in a policy, other than, let's say, the process of how do we do this and why do we like this as a company. You can see it here on the screen. It also relates to the results from our survey. Basically, what you will always see in a policy for work from anywhere is, number one, how long. You can see it on the left-hand side. We'll get to it in a second. And the other one is where to. So destinations, where can I work from anywhere? What countries are allowed? What countries are not allowed? And what you can see on the left-hand side, if we go back to duration, there's a super strong variety. Currently, what you can see here is that our clients in education, automotive, technology, etc., the average that we see is usually 65 days on average in the policy that they allow. I think this has grown quite strongly over the past years, because 2 years ago, when this whole concept really originated, it was rather around 10 days, 20 days, max 30 days. But you see that as employees are adopting the benefit, they're of course also pushing for more, because it's never enough, that you see this number going up. You will limit the number of days, not only because you would like probably to see your people in the office every now and then, but very strongly also for compliance reasons. You don't want your people, definitely don't want your people to exceed 183 days in a particular country, but for especially corporate tax reasons, you'll probably set the limit a little bit lower so that you are certain that a lot of employees can actually go and benefit from this policy, but also the accumulated presence in a particular destination country will not trigger a compliance risk. So that's what you'll see in a policy. Number one, duration limitation, 20, 30, 65, 100 days. whatever you feel comfortable with and management approves. And
Right.
then the other one, like I said, is destination limitation, or setting some boundaries there, literally, where we see usually three trends, three types of policies. The first one is EU only, because within the EU, well, for those of in the UK, sorry that you've left us, you might come back, I don't know. But within the UK, obviously, traveling is relatively easy. Also, from a data protection perspective, companies feel rather secure only allowing the EU. Then we see EU plus as a very, let's say, common policy, even though it's only just 3%, but I like it very much myself. Basically, what it says is, look, you can go to other countries in the EU or to EU destinations, plus the country where you are a passport holder from. Because what we've seen that is the work from anywhere benefit is not only used for, let's say, Germans or Brits going to Spain, Italy, really enjoying a vacation location to work from, but very much also for your international employee population going to visit their home country, going to visit their family and friends for a little bit longer than they were usually capable to do. So in that setup, it's a very good idea to extend the policy not only to EU, but also say, look, if you have a, I don't know, Indian passport, then you're also fundamentally allowed to go to India to work from there for a little bit. And the last option is a global policy, which doesn't necessarily mean they can just go anywhere, but it rather says, look, fundamentally, we're open to every country you would like to work from. But what we always see is that companies have a, let's say, individual assessment in the process that says, look, but tell us where you want to work from. And if that request, well, now, if it's going to be Russia, you will all know what the answer is going to be. But for obvious reasons, with China, a lot of employers have the same outcome, and they will simply say, look, yeah, thanks for the request. Of course, we've looked into it because our policy is fundamentally global, but with your specific request, we can't accept it because of, well, political data protection reasons or whatever the reason is. So those are the two things that you would usually see in a policy.
To that, Peter, we've got a couple of questions that I think we could tie into here, maybe jumping a little ahead into the compliance piece, but a couple of questions around how many days can you work in a place before it becomes a legal or social security trouble? And there's another question in here. We've got more questions jumping in. This is fantastic. And yeah, how long can they work in a different country for tax implications? So TLDR is it depends. But Peter, do you maybe from a compliance perspective want to shed a little bit more color on that before we jump ahead?
Yes, what was this first question you said?
The first question was, is there a limit of days legally that someone can work abroad? And I think that ties into kind of what countries you want your policy to be permissible within. And the other was, how long can you work there before tax implications start affecting employee and business relations?
Yeah, amazing. Let's go to the risk dimensions, and I can quickly give an intro on that. Because yes, the lawyer answer that you'll always get to a question like this is obviously it depends. Super easy example related to the first risk dimension that you see here on the screen. Basically, these are the risk dimensions that are relevant for when people are temporarily working from abroad, whether it is a work from anywhere situation, so vacation or a business trip or as an expat, doesn't really matter. These are the legal areas that are relevant. So they include visa, corporate tax, which is permanent establishment, payroll, employment tax, social security, PWD. It's like a European EU directive that requires certain notifications, labor law, data protection, and health insurance. A super easy example, if you don't have a work entitlement to work in a particular country. So for EU citizens within the EU, that's usually not a problem, but let's assume I want to go to Australia. Australia is always pretty particular when it comes to foreigners going to work from there. So also in a work from anywhere situation, very unlikely that without having obtained a visa, I don't have a valid working title. And then it would be illegal as of day one if I start working there. So that's pretty simple. If you look at the other risk dimensions here, it's probably a little bit, let's say, leaner, or at least from a social security perspective. No one will tell you that it's illegal to work from somewhere based on social security legislation. Worst case, in a social security setup, would mean that you become socially secured in the destination country. That's not necessarily illegal. And same goes for taxes. Nobody has a problem with you going to Australia, work from there, and pay taxes, as long as you have a valid working title. So the work entitlement risk dimension is really the fundamental showstopper. At the same time, what you will definitely feel as a showstopper as well is saying, look, it's not necessarily illegal to work in Australia and pay taxes there, to constitute a permanent establishment or to run a payroll there. But we don't want this. We want to offer an employee benefit, and we don't want to get ourselves like an employer burden because of this policy. And that's why those thresholds of number of days, but also the destination limitations that you usually see are in the policy, to make sure that people with a can work from other countries, but then at least not to the extent, so not as long as they are then constituting either a tax liability for the employer or a tax liability for themselves or a social security liability. And that really depends on, well, the number of days, what these individuals are doing. Like the more senior, the faster a corporate tax risk would arise, for instance. What you see, for instance, for a personal tax liability to occur, usually you'd have to work more than 183 days in a particular country. So that's a pretty clear rule, but that really only goes for the employment tax or the individual tax risk dimension, not for the permanent tax, permanent establishment risk dimension. So it's a long answer to this to the question, but yeah, like I said, it depends, and it really depends on the individual case, like who is traveling, passport holder, what job title, where is he going to, but it also depends on what you want to, let's say, limit as a company.
For sure. And I think that dovetails nicely into Cheryl's question here, specific to A1s, where there's different permissions, and she wants to understand sort of what the real risk or likelihood of a risk materializing on a day one situation where a social security treaty might be in place, specifically for A1s and COCs for business travelers, wondering if there are specific guidelines as to when these certificates should be put in place for certain trips of a certain duration to a certain location, for example. Would like to get your thoughts on that, please, Peter. There was also, which kind of ties into Joanna's question here, about are there certain countries where people go to work for certain tax purposes, even if they do so for only a day? I think she might be looking at either non-taxable days working out of home zone versus going to somewhere where you might not need documentation, and we have a list of countries which are stricter on that. So maybe you could speak to that as well.
Yeah, let me cover the social security question first and chew on the second topic for a bit. Mm-hmm. So in the social security, so talking about the social security risk dimension, there are two risks basically from a work from anywhere setup. The first risk is that you would drop out of your home country, simply the country where you live and usually work, social security system, which is usually something that the employee doesn't want, but you're insured in the UK or in Germany, and simply by going to Spain or, like, to stick with the example, Australia, you don't want to drop out of your home country social security system. The other risk of social security is obviously connected. It would be becoming a obligatory member of the destination country social security system. So of course it wouldn't already be very good fun dropping out of your home country, but it could also be that you become part of the destination country social security, maybe even both if there's no treaty. So the good news is there's a lot of social security treaties in place. And as soon as there's a social security treaty, it's very unlikely, there's always ifs and buts, right? But it's very unlikely that you will become socially secured in both countries. But to make sure that you, first, do not drop out of your home country social security, and second, that more or less the destination country will have no right, or will in practice not tell you that you become a part of their social security system, you can request this A1 or this COC that Brock mentioned. It's basically a confirmation that says, Brock, you're employed in Spain, you're on the payroll there, you're socially secured there, you're now going to work from Australia for a little bit, but don't worry, we in Spain confirm that you will remain a part of the Spanish social security during this work from anywhere situation. That's what an A1 or a COC, it's exactly the same, just differs between countries, EU or not, whether you get an A1 or a COC, but the content is exactly the same. Now, getting an A1 or a COC in more or less every country is not strictly obligatory upfront. It's highly recommended, but you can usually also get them afterwards, which is a good thing, by the way, because in some countries, in the UK is a negative example in this regard, it takes forever to get an A1 or a COC. Well, not necessarily forever, but we're easily talking 3 months or so. And people do not really plan their vacations 3 months ahead usually. So then you get your A1 only after the trip has either commenced or maybe it's already ended. So you can get them later, but it's highly recommended to just apply for them upfront. Hopefully you actually get it upfront so the traveler really has nothing to worry about. Why do you want this? Well, just to make sure, but also if you enter the country, customs might ask you questions. Usually this is about immigration, right? Do you have a right to work here, where you're from? Are you going to go home again after 2 or 3 weeks? But they can also request social security evidence, which would be this A1 or a COC. There are a couple of countries that actually say they levy fines on not bringing an A1 or a COC. I think France is an example here. We've not seen this in practice too much, but just to avoid uncomfortable situations for your employee, but also just to make sure that you are compliant from the start. You want to make sure that you get yourself an A1 or at least request for it before the employee travels.
Sweden's another case that we've been hearing lots of noise from, where they've become a lot stricter in their requirements for social security proofs. And in certain cases with organizations I've spoken to, even on edge cases where A1s may not be 100% required, anybody doing a certain kind of business for the domicile entity in Sweden are required to have the A1 regardless as a backstop. So I think it's a really interesting case where, even though there may be some gray area that you can play with regards to likelihood and liability, the mandate is you have this and you do your diligence up front, or else we won't allow you to come in. And that's from a corporate perspective, not even necessarily the government. It's just something interesting that I've seen that's changed, even in the short time that I've been working in your industry, where you've got a lot more experience. And maybe to that, I know that there have been lots of questions about documentation, presentation on spot checks and on customs. So outside of an A1 or a COC, what else might a traveler be asked to provide if they get to the customs desk, or if they're at a co-working or office space and have a spot check by the authorities?
Yeah, great question. But let me get back to the text question that we had parked for a little bit. I'm not entirely sure if I understood it correctly, but I think it was a little bit in the direction of, do you see people and please going to places, let's say under the work from anywhere policy, to save on taxes? Brock, is that also how you understood that question?
I think so, yeah. Okay. So to go there for tax purposes, I know you could consider non-domicile arrangements or working outside your home zone as tax claims. Joanna, maybe in the chat, do you want to add a little clarity on that?
Assuming we got let's say, understood the question correctly so far, I think the pretty easy answer is, in terms of work from anywhere, this is not what we see. It might be the case for fully remote companies where it's not work from anywhere for a limited time, but you can basically tell your people, look, we don't really care where you work from. If you want to move, so relocate to the Guernsey Islands or to Barbados or to, well,
Andorra, my neighbor.
Exactly. And make sure, or like maybe even the United Arab Emirates, where you don't pay personal income tax. Yes, for permanent remote work situations, you might see this, and there's a big opportunity for the employee to save on taxes. Obviously, it comes with a pretty significant employer burden, because it might be great that your employee in the United Arab Emirates is not paying personal income taxes, but you will have to do something as an employer to make sure you can employ your people there, have a local employment contract, etc. This is basically the reason that employers of records like WorkMotion or Deal exist, but this is permanent remote work from abroad. If we look at work from anywhere, which is for a limited duration, all of these risk dimensions that you see here, basically what you will try to achieve in your policy and in your daily doings when the policy is live, is to prevent from any local tax liability to come up. So you don't want the local tax legislation to become applicable, so to say, as a result of which the employee will not be able to benefit from lower tax rates in the destination country. You will keep the individual on the home country payroll, you will keep the individual on the home country social security, and you as an employer will want to keep your, let's say, carefully crafted organizational structure the way it is. You did not establish an entity in Guernsey or in the United Arab Emirates, and you want to keep it that way. So yeah, for tax purposes, the tax evasion or just lower tax rates and that type of benefits is usually not what you see as a result of the work from anywhere.
For sure.
Policy.
And we've got a little bit more clarity from Joanna here, and she's happy with the answer that you've got there. So that's fantastic.
Amazing. Yeah, thanks for all the questions. Really good. And I think it also allows us still to go through all of the different risk dimensions quite neatly.
Please do keep them coming.
So, Brock, you raised the question, what is the risk, like what can you be asked for when you are working from abroad for a little bit? We've already talked about an A1 or a COC, so a social security certificate. We see that indeed some authorities are pretty actively scanning, let's say, shared workplaces or things like this to check whether people are working from there and whether they are socially insured in that particular country or whether they got an A1 or a COC with them. So definitely that's one. Of course, if you enter a country, you're already asked quite frequently around the working entitlement. But of course, there's also authorities checking for basically illegal labor. It sounds really heavy, but if you're going to work somewhere from somewhere where you don't have a work entitlement, we're just calling it illegal labor with very heavy penalties. So that's checked at the border, but also by authorities. I think then there's two other situations where you're asked for something. And the first is related to the Posted Workers Directive that you see on the left bottom side here. Based on this EU directive, you have to do certain notifications. For workationers, this is usually not required because these people are not assumed to be posted because they go for private reasons. Belgium is the exception that confirms the rule, basically. So you will have to do a PWD notification if someone goes to enjoy work from anywhere in Belgium. And with the PWD notification, there's a confirmation that you get, and you can also be asked to show that confirmation to the authorities. So that's situation one, like there's 3 documents, right? So valid working entitlement could be your passport, the social security certificate, A1 or COC, and the third one is potentially a PWD notification confirmation. The last situation where, let's say, a compliance risk is likely to materialize is, excusez le mot, if shit hits the fan, right? If we're talking health insurance, your employee just gets into an accident, or maybe the computer just like falls down the desk and it breaks down. That's not necessarily a compliance, let's say, risk that materializes, but it is a problem. The employee is not working from there, and it might call you up and say, look, you didn't have a policy, so I kind of assumed I was allowed to work from somewhere abroad. I'm not supposed to be, or I'm not flying back home in 2 months from now. Can you send me over a new laptop, please? Or can you have this thing repaired? Would be a pretty awkward situation. Like I said, it's not necessarily compliance risk materializing, but it would be uncomfortable. It would definitely be a lot more uncomfortable if the employee gets into an accident and takes the position, rightfully or maybe not so rightfully, that it's actually a professional accident because he or she was working and trampled over the adapter cable from the computer and just said, look, I was on a workation, I was just working from anywhere, you allowed me to do this, now I got a professional accident. I expect you to pay for all of the health insurance bills that are coming in. That could be a pretty significant problem, not only from authorities, but also from your insurance. They might say there's no coverage abroad, labor law aspects playing in. So those are, I think, let's say the common situations where things might go wrong and compliance risks would actually materialize.
So there's a great question tied in directly to that from Sarah on what kind of insurance policy do we need to ensure we cover our employees when they're working from anywhere?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, of course, employees usually, I think in all the countries that are represented in this webinar, they have a mandatory national health insurance. Whether it's public or private doesn't really matter. The employee will usually will have a health insurance in the home country. And then what you as an employer should make sure you have is a travel health insurance that basically covers the health insurance costs from abroad if the personal or public health insurance from the home country doesn't cover this or doesn't cover this entirely. So it's a travel health insurance. We see a lot of clients or companies in general taking their business travel insurance for this as the basis. I think it's a very good basis, but I would always recommend to reach out to the travel health insurance provider to also check if it's not necessarily a business trip, but rather a vacation, privately driven, not paid for by you as the employer. Is the employee still covered? What we do at WorkFlex is, like we say, travel health insurance, as you also hopefully know, it's not extremely expensive. So we simply say, look, for every trip booked through WorkFlex or registered on WorkFlex, we get you the compliance measures. We'll get to that in a second. And the compliance measure also includes that we've got appropriate travel health insurance. And our policy for business travel is obviously just on business travel, but we've got a specific policy that focuses on work from anywhere.
That's great. So just a couple more things on documentation and permanent establishment and the rest of that. A simple one. What's the difference between an A1 and a CA3821, which is an HMRC form declaring that you've sent someone abroad?
I'm actually looking at the CA32. So yeah, so that's a form. Is that you, Brock, who already knows this form, CA328?
Very obliquely. This is a question from Caroline.
Yeah, okay. So from what I know and just had confirmed, an A1 or a COC is a form that confirms the Social Security in the home country. And a CA3821 form is rather you informing the authorities in the UK of sending someone abroad. It has technically nothing to do with the Social Security, and it definitely does not confirm that the employee would remain socially secured in the home country. So it's a very different document. You do request an A1 or a COC from the HMRC, so that's probably the only thing that's the same for both documents.
Yeah, potentially a corporate taxation situation there more than anything. Another good one on documentation here is regarding people that commuter travel, perhaps, or people that travel quite extensively, perhaps senior directors or management, specifically for EU and UK travelers. The question is, can you get a blanket European-wide A1 or COC that covers all business trips within the long time period? I know the short answer to this, which is 2 letters and starts with N. But Peter, do you want to add a little bit more information as to why that isn't really the case with the structures we have in place?
Yeah, that's a good question. And indeed, the answer, like the super short answer, is no. Look, regularly, you just get your A1 for a specific trip that is limited in duration to a particular destination country. And that A1 that you get is then going to say, look, Brock, thanks for your request. You requested a trip from the UK to, I don't know, Germany. For that trip, you're covered in the British Social Security system. If you're then traveling either as part of this trip or as a separate trip from the UK to Italy, that A1 doesn't cover it because it says, look, you're covered for that trip from the UK to Germany. And the system doesn't allow you to request, let's say, multiple trips, multiple destinations into one A1. So it's, let's say, a practical problem that stands in the way. Look, we've automated most of these requests, so we do it very quickly, but like systems of the authorities doesn't really allow you to get these multiple A1s. There are some exceptional A1s, for instance, for expats. They usually get a longer term A1 that basically says, look, this expat's going to work from Germany now for the next 2 years, but for this entirety, the individual remain part of the Social Security system. But this A1 then does not cover any business trips from Germany to Italy or Germany to Spain. Then the second and last exception, I think, for A1s is the multi-state A1. If someone on a longer basis actually works from multiple countries. In that case, you can get this multi-state A1, which basically says, look, Brock might be working from Germany, Italy for a little bit longer time, but for the duration of the next year or something like this, this individual will remain socially secured in this example, Germany. But yeah, so no, there's not an A1 that you can request for the next 3 years saying, does this work? Is it going to work this way? It's
And I think it's helpful to just back up and also present a little bit about the why. And that really comes down to the fact that the A1s and the COCs pertain specifically to the social security treaties between the home country of employment and the host country or where the person is visiting. So you can't have an intrastate outside of these very specific cases where you can just be covered for the entire Schengen or the entire EU 27, as nice as that would be. It was a very good question, and thanks for that. Doubling back into a slightly different compliance area with permanent establishment, Joanna asked another question here about any countries that would consider an entity to be established with sooner than 65 days presence.
Yeah, sorry to give the lawyer answer. It depends. So in general, okay, I don't want to make it too complex, but I'll go through it super fast. So we're talking about the permanent establishment risk dimension that you can see here, second from the left, top line, which is a corporate tax thing. And by the way, for companies, usually the most important risk dimension. Look, of course, you don't want your employee to work from somewhere without a valid working title, but it's rather the employee's problem at the border. Of course, not very comfortable, but as an employer, you can kind of live with it. Social Security might be uncomfortable, might get a little bit expensive too, so you want it sorted out. But if we're talking permanent establishment, oh, that's a different story. Companies have spent, well, look, I worked at PwC before, right? And clients used to pay us hundreds of thousands of pounds or euros, maybe even millions, to help them craft their global tax structure, to make sure that basically profits are taxed, or like at least profits are taxed to start with. And if profits are taxed, that you do this in a low tax country. And if you're deducting, that you're basically deducting costs in a high tax country. Anyway, a structure is a structure, and your CFO will definitely not like it if your work from anywhere policy is going to mess up this structure by constituting a PE in a destination country of a workation. What is a PE? It's basically a little bit of the company in the destination. Usually we would like equal this to a entity. It's not necessarily the case, could also simply just be a branch or a PE, but usually you would see it as an entity. Now, there's a couple of ways of constituting an entity, and duration of the presence has an effect. If so, then 65 days is not a border that's actually set in any tax treaty. You'd rather look at 183 days again, which is a service PE clause in a tax treaty. But that's only if you don't have, let's say, one of the other two types of PEs that exist, or three types of other PEs that exist. So we've got service PE, in that case, 165 days, don't worry. However, please note, it's accumulated presence. So one individual, 65 days, all good. If we're talking three, you can do the math, then you'd actually constitute a service PE. Then there's three other PEs, won't spend too much time on it, but they are a project PE, a fixed place of business PE, or a dependent agent PE. As soon as you have a building or a project site in a destination country and the individual is visiting that as part of the workation or simply as part of a business trip or whatever, this whole 65 days or whatever day threshold doesn't count. You've got a structure, a building in a destination country, which might trigger taxes as of day one, simply because there is a structure. And the other one is dependent agent. If the individual traveling to a particular country is a dependent agent, that means, very simply put, is it a important senior employee of the firm making important management decisions or doing very big sales deals, then it doesn't matter how long he or she is going to be there. It rather depends on what is he or she doing. Is he or she closing big deals? Is he or she attending important business management meetings? Then maybe even on day 5 of that trip, the PE is already constituted, at least in the opinion of the destination country authorities.
Tied to
So
the
it's
value.
basically another reason to say, or another like ground for saying, look, you need to look into every workation request on an individual basis, because the rules, looking at these risk dimensions, they are big and bold, but they play out for every trip, for every individual, for every destination country in a different way.
Yeah, a little bit complicated, but good to
Sorry.
be aware of. Thank you, Mr. Lawyer. One more question on documentation and sort of compliance fulfillment before we get into sort of future prognoses and maybe a little bit more of the soft stuff on managing a WFA policy. So the one that was submitted by an attendee in the registration was, how should a company deal with PWD notifications, and can PWD submissions be fully automated across the EU?
So you need to do a PWD notification if you're posting an employee. If we're talking workations, it's usually not a posting. Like I said, the exception is Belgium. If you're also considering business travel, then a lot of travel into Europe is, or like in between Europe, European countries is PWD notification liable, and then you need to go to the website of the recipient country, the destination country, and do the PWD notification.
And maybe just
We
to
as
back up
WorkFlex,
1 second, Peter, can we just clarify what posting a worker entails versus a work from anywhere presence?
yeah. So a posting means you as the employer initiate someone going abroad. You basically we tell you, Brock, you need to go on a business trip to Germany to see a client or whatever. That's posting. It could be a business trip. Of course, many in the GM world see posting as a expat being posted for a little bit of a longer time. But you as the employer are initiating the trip. Obviously, within, like, when we're talking work from anywhere, it's generally, or not generally, it should be the employee initiating the stay abroad, as a result of which we're not talking about a posting, and a non-posting, you don't have to do a PWD notification.
The core reason for the trip, really.
Yeah. Again, exception is Belgium. We at WorkFlex, we've automated quite a few of these PWD notification processes, but they differ, like I said, for every destination country. So yeah, it's technically possible to automate all of them, but I don't think there's anyone who has done this already. And definitely clients do not do that in-house, because you need a certain volume, obviously, to start thinking about automation there.
Yeah, that's perfect. So maybe one for you to chew on, maybe to talk a little bit about the differences that you've seen in the compliance world or industry at large between your time as a consultant and now your time as a founder. Joanna asks a great question. We're a small charity and so far have informally allowed work from anywhere, but want to set some more guidelines around it, and asks, what are the key considerations they would need to take into account to be compliant, but also to give employees flexibility without busting the budget, being a small organization and also a charity?
Amazing question. You also did exactly this same as I did. Oh no, I wanted to go through this one. Yeah, like I said, I think you need a policy. We've already discussed this earlier, saying where can you go to for how long, and if we're allowing this, this is the workflow that you'd have to follow. Of course, in the policy, we also say, look, you are deciding to go somewhere, so we're happy to, let's say, take care of the compliance that we need to do as an employer. It's not necessarily very costly. I mean, getting an A1 or doing a PWD notification is for free. It doesn't cost you money. And you're obviously preventing bigger compliance costs from arising by getting this A1 and doing this PWD, etc. And what you then want to do for each trip in order to be compliant is take a couple of these measures, like I already said, get an A1, etc. And we got a lot of questions already so far on like different measures, which kind of implies that quite a few of you are not taking all of the measures that you can technically take. Well, this results from our survey. You're not alone in this, right? So 50% of the employees read the policy and actually make that there's a process in place that employees confirm this. If you see A1, it's exactly in the middle of this graph. Only 39% of the people that were surveyed say that they do this for some, maybe all of the work cases that they see. So a lot of companies, your peers basically, they do take a couple of measures if they can, realistically. But it's still very common to kind of like be swimming in this area a little bit and try to do what you can do, that you know how to do it. But taking all of these measures is quite not necessarily costly in money, but rather costly in time, and sometimes also quite complex simply to just do. I can talk about it for hours, obviously, but also looking at Brock, is there
Time here, yeah.
one big last question you want answered, or?
Yeah, I think there's a really good one here, which should pretty well bring us to the top of the hour here. Thanks, Mel, for sending this one through. So understanding the risks are already here, but how do you think the risks will heighten or change in 2025 following new visa requirements, new regime changes, and new economic policies? And that's kind of the
amazing
future chat here. And if anybody has any other questions, please do submit them here. We will answer you offline. And again, we'll share the recording and all of the materials shared today as well. Thanks very much.
Yeah, cool. And a great, Mel, to see you here. And a very good question. So yes, the risks are here, and will they heighten due to new requirements? I think the pretty short answer, especially with your example, the new visa requirements into the EU, the ETIAS, basically the European ESTA that is being introduced, the answer can only be yes. It's an administrative thing. It's probably not going to be super complex. It's going to cost a couple of euros, but it's not going to make your life easier. And you can kind of compare it to a work entitlement. If you don't have an ETIAS going forward traveling to Europe, you're probably simply not going to be let in. So it's quite a showstopper. So that's one. And one other aspect into the future is, look, we're talking about all of these risk dimensions, right? I can go to that slide again. If you look at if Europe, but in general in the world, we are aligning on so many different topics in politics. Of course, there's also big differences, but we are aligning some of the VAT topics. We're aligning data security. We're aligning refugee support, or like war support, or exactly the contrary of war, whatever. A couple of things that countries are very difficult, or are experiencing big difficulties in aligning, is taxation, corporate tax. Like obviously there's still tax havens within Europe. Netherlands is actually considered one. Ireland is considered one. So not only are they making it more difficult with the ETIAS, in case any one of you was hoping for European or global regulations aligning on these topics, all of these topics, and making it more easy to manage work from anywhere compliantly in the medium term future, forget it. That's not going to happen. It's only going to get more compliant. So you're going to have to manage, it's going to be more complex, I'm sorry. So you're going to have to manage this, and it's going to be increasingly difficult with the ETIAS coming up.
I mean, from everything that we've talked about here, going from the confusion of the last few years of working with the pandemic, Brexit, the tech industry crunch, financial issues, and all the rest of this, the old saying still applies. The only two constants are death and taxes. And while ways of working, productivity, places of work, cohorts and everything continue to change, making sure that compliance is fully covered, T's crossed, I's dotted, to me sounds like one of the most important things that everybody on this call should be doing as part of their homework after this session. Peter, would you agree? And do you have any thoughts or comments on that?
No, I simply 100% agree.
Perfect. Well, just being mindful of the time, we've got 1 minute left. We do have a couple of questions in the chat, which we will make sure to answer offline. We've flipped up the meeting booking link if anybody has any further questions or wants to understand how WorkFlex takes a little bit of the pain and elevates compliance to 100% in the world of global mobility and work from anywhere schemes. And feel free to reach out to us. Thanks again to Peter for your time. Super insightful. Thanks for the wild level of engagement, everybody. And Peter, any final words from you before we wish everybody a happy day?
A happy day to anyone. No, yeah, really, thanks for so many people being here and for all the questions. I hope I was also basically able to share a little bit of my enthusiasm for these sometimes boring and complex legal and tax topics. Yeah, it's a cool world and it's a really cool topic. So yeah, really happy that you were all here. Thanks for joining. Thanks, Bob, for moderating.
Thanks for being engaging and making such a dry topic at least somewhat animated and very interesting. Thanks all. We'll follow up with a recording shortly after and wish you all a wonderful afternoon. Take care.
Bye.